At United Methodist News, we've been dedicated to providing fair, faithful, and trusted reporting on the news and events shaping the United Methodist Church for almost 85 years. United Methodists and individuals outside the denomination alike rely on UM News to tell the authentic story of the church. Get the latest news and subscribe to receive it daily at umnews.org.
Now, I may sound like a broken record, but y'all know that I am all in on one of Seth Godin's alternative definitions to good marketing, telling our stories in such a way that if people knew the truth about us, they would want to connect with us. There are three key ideas in that definition. One, we're telling stories, not just reciting selling points. Two, we're revealing something that's true. And three, we're doing it in a way that is compelling and moves people to action. On this episode of the MyCom Church Marketing Podcast, we're joined by someone who's passionate about ideas like these. It's speaker, teacher, and all-around communications expert, Sabring Joy Stevens. Sabrina is not only our podcast today, but she's also leading a webinar in May 2024 for us that's going to be a huge help to all of us as we respond to General Conference both locally and online. So thank you to everybody for listening. My name is Dan Wunderlich. I'm United Methodist pastor, and Sabrina, thanks so much for being with us today.
And thanks so much for having me. Excited to chat.
Well, let's begin by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Sure. So I have been an advocate. My first adult life, I always say I was a teacher. I taught 4th and 5th grade, but I now teach grownups because we need way more help. And so my focus, the thing that comes most naturally to me, as a teacher, as someone who is a communicator, is communication strategy. So particularly drawing on my background about how people learn, how our minds grow and change, I really dig into a lot in the power of story. That is what our brains are set up to do. And so when we teach people, when we advocate, when we try to just get humans to do anything, the most effective way to do that is to use story. And so that's really been the core of what I do across a variety of issues and topics. And then in particular, as I work with all sorts of people in society who are trying to promote the common good. And as we know, it is not easy to do that, especially in today's world where there are organized campaigns to confuse people, to spread lies and confusion, to divide and distract people from getting things done. And so having kind of come up alongside the formal study of what's now called information disorder, so being on the front lines of doing that kind of work in public policy conversations and elsewhere, but then getting to study and work alongside the researchers who are formalizing our understanding of that. One of my little kind of niche areas that I occupy is just helping people figure out how to communicate in ways that help people overcome deception and confusion.
Is it a little bit like seeing the glitch in the matrix? Like once you know what to look for, you start to see this stuff everywhere that other people aren't seeing?
Absolutely. That is a very good metaphor. And I talk about the power of metaphor a lot too. But it's absolutely a good metaphor because that's exactly it. Once you see kind of the recurring patterns in how bad actors operate, you can spot it, whether it's people, no matter what side, quote unquote, of the political spectrum they're coming from, no matter what their other, attributes are. As my grandma always said, the devil ain't creative. And so, there's going to be kind of a new flavor to it, but it's going to be the same basic structure of these kinds of things. And so once you figure that out, you're like, oh, okay, this is the kind of way I need to communicate, deal with it.
Oh, yeah. Well, what I think is so helpful, and it has me excited both for today and for your upcoming webinar, is that it seems like you're both a practitioner and a teacher. A lot of people just, they learn a science and then they teach it, but it seems like you actually have been in the trenches and doing it. And so, of course, I am really excited. One of the workshops that you do lead regularly, it's called Clarity Over Confusion. And that'll be the subject of the webinar we touched on in the intro. It's going to happen on Wednesday, May the 15th of 2024 at noon Central Time. And listeners, be sure you're subscribed to the MyCom email newsletter. That way you won't miss the registration link. You can sign up for that email at resourceumc.org. But Sabrina, can you give us a little sneak peek into what that workshop is about and why it's going to be so helpful for us as we tell the story of General Conference to our congregations and possibly have to combat maybe some misunderstandings or even misinformation?
Absolutely. So the core of it is really helping give an overview of the recurring patterns in how bad actors or anybody who is trying to spread confusion and conflict is going to do that, right? Again, the devil ain't creative. We also
Yeah.
have the benefit of understanding the spiritual underpinnings of all this. I always say when I'm working with y'all that a huge advantage we have when working in this church context that the rest of my clients outside of the church world don't have is that we understand that there is a spiritual underpinning to all of this. And
Yes. Mm-hmm.
that pattern that bad actors use is laid out right in Genesis 3. We're very familiar with it if we understand how it applies to this modern communications context. And so we go there first to help people understand, yes, there's going to be, sort of different flavors to the gossip, the rumors, the misinformation you're dealing with, but they're going to fall into these 3 main categories over and over and over again. And once you realize that or recognize that, then you can start to create communications that are going to be robust enough to anticipate and inoculate against some of it and respond more effectively to the rest of it. And then we go into 3 keys basically to help us resist both succumbing to this kind of confusion, and then also being able to communicate in ways that help us address it, rebuild trust, and things like that. And so in a nutshell, that's what we'll be doing on May 15th.
Well, I'll just say I plan to be there, and I'm not getting paid to be there. This is not a plant. I wasn't told to say I will be there. I hear in this description the challenges that I know I'm facing as a local church pastor and as someone that sometimes gets called on unofficially. Obviously, I'm not the conference communicator, but sometimes people outside of the United Methodist Church ask me about what's going on, and they've seen and read things that I didn't have any idea was out there. And so, Sabrina, I'm really looking forward to it. But this is obviously, it's a podcast for people who work in church marketing and communications, and we all have our own reasons for why we do it. Some of us love it and seek it out. I'm that way. I have a degree in advertising, and when I don't want to do the hard work of being the local church pastor, I duck into some creative communications work because it's a way to avoid the hard work. But some of us are solo pastors or, staff or volunteers, and we're doing it because somebody has to, and it's on our plate. But this is very clearly, it's a passion for you. And you've told us a little bit of your story, but when did you first recognize that you had a passion for and a gifting for communication? And why have you dedicated yourself to helping individuals and organizations develop in this area?
Sure. So I think for me, I really recognized this in my teen years. I kind of was always like a bit of a rabble rouser. I was that kid who, if I saw something that I thought was unfair in school or in the world, I had to say something about it. I had to make a little campaign about it. My early campaigns were quite embarrassing, but we learned from all the things. Praise be to the God of Romans 8:28. And so, I have always had that passion to, understand things better. I've always been a deeply curious person. And then when I know something, I want to tell everybody about it. When I figured something out, I want to tell everybody about it. And so that's just how I'm wired. And I really, especially if we're all going to live together, I've always been just passionate about helping people live together better. I love when different kinds of people come together and all the different beautiful things we're capable of when we work in ways that are productive and constructive. I've also seen very up close what can happen when we are pitted against each other, when we're deceived. I've been, on the, I think especially my earliest days of being a little activist and a little organizer. And that's what kind of led me into communications, is just seeing how good people, or as good as people can be, let's be real.
Sure. Yeah,
how,
absolutely.
People who want to do the right thing can be easily misled into doing bad things because they've been given bad information. That's always been the through line in every cause that I've ever been passionate about or involved with. And so for me, I just really feel like if we're going to try to live together in a free society, we have to be able to communicate with each other in ways that help us actually understand what's going on, get clear about what we're actually dealing with, so we can have, we're going to disagree on things, and that's great. We actually should disagree and be able to do so respectfully and figure out how to reconcile all our different perspectives to get to the best possible, trade-offs for the given situation. My whole thing is that what really breaks my heart is to see people who want to do something good, doing something bad just because they don't know any better. And so as a teacher, of people from, 9 to 99, that's always been my key thing. It's just, I want to see people being able to make the best use of their gifts, their talents, the information available to them. And it really breaks my heart. It's like, one of my old pastors used to say, like, your unique agitation is part of your call. And my unique agitation is that, like, I hate it when I see people making bad decisions based on bad information, even though they're trying to do good things. And so that's really, no matter what the issue is, I just want to make sure people have the best possible information, can talk about it clearly so they can actually deal with the real issue versus arguing about stuff that is not even relevant.
Sabrina, what I love about that is the empathy and the compassion that I hear, in your story, because I'll admit there's part of me that was like, I should go to Sabrina's session so I can show people where they've been misled and show them how they're wrong so that I can be right. But what I hear is almost like the story where Jesus is trying to go off for time by himself, and he lands, and he tried to sail across a lake that you can actually see all the way across. So the crowd followed him on the shore. There's thousands there. And it says Jesus got out of the boat and he had compassion on the crowd. And so what I see or what I hear in your story is like, there are people who look, they're wrong, or they might be wrong, or from our perspective, they're wrong. And obviously we would like our side, quote unquote, to win, or our ideas or the truth, what we see as the truth to bear out. But I hear just a compassion for people. And I know in my own heart that has been missing some in the conflict in the church. And so thank you for that reminder. But sorry, I could go off on that for forever. We are here to talk about digital storytelling. And I referenced Seth Godin in the beginning. This is not your definition. I'm not asking you to endorse it or to overturn it. But I love that it does frame marketing as storytelling. And Seth was one of the first people I was exposed to that took that approach to it. Of course, there's Donald Miller with StoryBrand. There's all sorts of resources out there. But I think we've all experienced marketing or encountered marketing that's overly focused on facts and figures and features and selling points. And in some industries, that is the way to go. But for institutions and organizations and leaders like churches and church leaders, why is storytelling such a critical skill for us?
I think it goes back to just that basic understanding that our minds really are wired for story, right? There's a reason why Jesus taught in parables. There's a reason why story is so critical to culture building and teaching throughout the ages. It's because that's how God made our minds, right? And so we can have the most, compelling facts, figures, features, but at the end of the day, if people can't understand them, if they're not put in a context that people understand, and that context is the package of a story, then those other bits of information are not going to make their best impact. And so we really always want to be communicating in ways that people can best understand, particularly because there is so much information for people to sort through, day to day. What's really going to help people understand what they need to know is information that is presented to them in the form of a story that they can relate to their own lives. And so we really want to just always be leaning into that, because that's how we best help people understand what's going on.
Well, we have this phrase, natural storyteller, that describes people who seem to be able to make anything sound interesting. And these folks, they tend to have, intuition for the elements of a good story, and they know how to keep people engaged. There's always those people that they say, they could read the phone book and I'd listen to it. And while it's true that there are some people who are naturally gifted at it, it is a skill, and skills can be learned, right? Not every professional athlete is born with incredible coordination, and not every musician has perfect pitch. And so why is it important for those of us who maybe feel like we don't have that natural gift to not give up and believe that we can attain this skill? And then also those of us who are gifted at it, why should we not sort of plateau and just lean on our natural abilities, but actually work to develop it?
Oh, great question. That speaks right to my teacher heart. So I think for the folks who don't feel like they have the natural gift, I would challenge them on that, because while there absolutely are folks for whom that gift flows more naturally, I think, again, because our brains are wired for story, every one of us has this skill, right? We are making up stories in our minds to explain the world, even when we don't realize it. Hello, amateur conspiracy theorist, we are all. But so the thing for you, I would say to this person listening, if that's you, is to recognize the story you're telling yourself right now. that you're not gifted in this. Who told you that? Who is in your ear right now telling you that you're not gifted, right? Recognizing that there are elements of this, and this is the core of a lot of my trainings and the work I do with, individuals and organizations, is helping break down the elements of how to build a story-driven communications program, how to tell the story of your issue, your organization, your cause, etc., how to, build a narrative around something that you're trying to help people understand. There are, elements of story, right? Many of us were taught these things in school as well. And so drawing on those particular things, even if it doesn't feel like you're the kind of person who can off the cuff, have everybody, just hanging on your every word at a cocktail party, you definitely have what you need. If you can think and you can talk or write, you have everything you need to be able to do this well, because there are specific skills you can learn, elements that you can always make sure that you're including every time you're communicating that will help you do this. You may not be the person who speaks on the stage. You may not be the one who gives the message in the pulpit every week, but you don't have to be in order to do this kind of thing well. Everybody has a particular part of this that they can do well. And it takes all of us bringing those different gifts to bear in our different ways to get this kind of work done. Now, to the person who feels like they're more of a natural, I feel like the really important thing is to not rest on your laurels, right? To not think that just because it comes naturally to you, you can just kind of wing it every time. Because there are, and this is something was key to my own, just going from sort of like, I think I have a gift, I like to chat, to actually making a professional career of not only being able to do this as a practitioner, but then also be able to teach it to others. There's a difference between kind of stumbling into doing something well and kind of getting it right by accident, and being able to intentionally do that and execute every single time, right? We want to be able to, especially if you're doing this in any kind of professional capacity. And what I mean by professional capacity is if it's your role in your church community, even if you're not paid for it, even if you're not, it's not your only hat that you wear. If you are trying to communicate intentionally with other people, you need to know, what is it I'm trying to convey? What is the best way to convey it? What does my audience need to hear at this particular time? You need to be able to break down all those different elements. And so it's going to require more thought and attention than just the same skill set that might be the thing that makes people hang on your every word at, the end of a service or whatever else, right? And so you want to be able to do these things intentionally, not just hope that they happen by accident as they might in a more informal setting.
What I like there about that is there's a focus on understanding your audience, because there may be a group of people, a certain narrow demographic that you do speak naturally well to, and it could be because it's your demographic, right? You grew up in it, and so you've heard the stories that resonate. But if we're going to make change in our community, much less around the world or in our country, right, we have to be able to speak to multiple audiences, and that involves working on our communication. I like a lot of preachers, I spend a lot of time listening to stand-up comedians. And what I love is over the last 4 or 5 years since the pandemic started, and they, a bunch of them went a couple years without touring, they started doing small shows on Zoom, or they started podcasts where they were testing out jokes just because they couldn't perform live. And you come to realize, like, these people who are really good and make it look easy, it looks easy because of how hard they've worked on it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm sure you see that all the time in your causes. These people look like they're standing up and riffing, but really this is a lot of practice.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing too is making sure that, again, that there's a difference between something that comes out like naturally. We all love that feeling of just kind of getting up there and being able to just be moved in the moment. But again, if we've got to be able to do this and meet a certain, objective every time, especially if you're pressed for time. I know everybody listening is not feeling like they have just oodles and oodles of free time to squander on this, right? If you know you've got to get a certain job done and you have limited time to do it, then all the more reason to really start to break this down into its tactical elements so that you can consistently do that well, versus kind of being at the mercy of, does my heart feel like going along with me today or no? Is my mind just happening to lapse into this thing that's helpful or no, right? If you understand the elements of how to do this, then you can always do it, even when you're not in the mood, even when it's not feeling like it's flowing naturally.
That's so true. I've reached the point in my development as a preacher where I'm confident in my ability to write and deliver a good sermon. I just sometimes feel like I need 40 hours to do it. And there are
Yes.
many weeks where you do not have 40 hours to do it. So, and you certainly can't wait for the Spirit to strike when you have small children like I do. Like the Spirit needs to strike
Absolutely.
between 8 and 3. Like that's it. That's the window you
Yep.
got. But I know one of your passions is ethical storytelling. And we've touched on it here and there on previous episodes about the power of storytelling. And so one of the things I always try to bring up is that because storytelling has the power to shape how people see and understand and act in the world, we have to be good stewards of this power. So what kinds of things do you think about when it comes to ethical storytelling? And do you have maybe like a framework or ways that you think about the difference between shaping someone and manipulating someone?
Oof, yes, this question is right in my sweet spot. So I absolutely feel very strongly because we know that this is the way that people are structured to think and make sense of the world. I take it very seriously that we do this ethically. I always, whenever I'm working with anyone, and I've actually fired clients for not meeting these standards, um, is that we have to, first and foremost, be grounded in solid moral principles, logic, and evidence, right? If we don't have those things in place, then we should not be communicating with the public, right? And this
Yeah.
is, a thing that, as you can probably understand, makes me a little bit weird in the DC political world.
Sure. Yeah.
But so it's, when we think about ethical storytelling, being grounded, thinking about, why are we doing this? Are we making sure that we're in a space where we're being, both faithful and just very truthful with our audience, that we're being compassionate, because again, especially the more we talk about things that really matter, the more we are going to be touching on some of the deepest issues that affect people's lives, right? We're talking about people's souls. We're talking about so many different issues today that really affect some deep issues where people have trauma, where people have very serious backgrounds that they come into all this with. And so we want to make sure that as we engage with people, we're being thoughtful, we're being kind, we're being compassionate about how we approach both our audiences, as well as, especially if you're working with people who are individually telling their own stories, that we're working with them in ways that are not exploitative, that we're not using people, that we're not treating them as though they are, that we're not objectifying, right? We're not using them
Yeah.
for what they can offer to our marketing or our campaigns or whatever else we're doing, right? And when it comes to drawing this line between messaging and manipulation, right? I think the key there is, again, going back to those solid moral principles, logic, evidence, is what we are advocating for, is what we are putting forth, or what we're offering a win-win for everyone involved, right? Are we thinking about the highest good for everybody in that interaction, versus are we trying to move people to act in ways that they would not otherwise if they knew your real motivations, if they knew the real underlying things, right? This is one of the reasons why I'm very choosy about who I work with, and will, stop working with people if I realize, wait a minute, there's no, the logic isn't here.
Yeah.
The ethics aren't here, right? I thought this was accurate. It's actually not. So we're not going to move forward on that. And so I think that's a really key distinction, right? Something that I've repeatedly had to train people on, especially, again, the fact that a lot of my work takes place in the political realm. I'm so happy every time I get to work with you. I'll get away from that a little bit.
Yeah.
But I've had to repeatedly train people on, and it's the place where I get the most pushback, on not using things like fear and anger to motivate
Yeah.
their, audiences and calls to action. And when you start to see people really playing into like sort of those darker emotions, we start to see people scaring people, fear mongering, intentionally ginning up a sense of fear or anger. Something else that I think is another hallmark of manipulation is injecting a sense of time pressure. You've got to do this now or else,
Yep.
and again, there can be, sometimes we genuinely have to make people aware of a deadline, but there's a reason why scammers and all sorts of other people who are trying to manipulate you, to cheat you out of your money, etc., make you feel like you've got to act now so that you don't have the time to stop and think, like, wait a minute, they're saying this, but actually that doesn't make any sense, right? I think we really want to there are going to be times where we're telling stories that absolutely touch on some of these harder feelings and emotions. But there's a difference between, one, speaking with people in a way that acknowledges those feelings that may already be present, and then giving them a way forward out of it, versus like dragging people into those hard moments and then positioning them to feel forced into taking some call to action
Yeah.
in order to relieve the discomfort you caused. Right. And so I think that's what I really talk through with people a lot, is how, one, do you have that solid moral basis, those principles that are guiding you? Do you have logic and evidence on your side? Is what you're saying truthful? Right. If you've got all that and you're being compassionate with people's emotions versus using their emotions to try to get them to do something they wouldn't ordinarily do, then you're really staying on the right side of things. When you start to see people in that space of, really, especially when you see people leaning into fear and anger, those are
Yeah.
two really useful motivators when we're in a manipulation situation. If people are leaning into fear and anger and not giving people a way out that they would ordinarily choose, that's when you're really starting to see a manipulative dynamic.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Fear, anger, and that manufactured urgency. I mean, how many of us
Yes.
have bought something off an Instagram ad because there was a countdown clock? Like, the price goes
Oh
up,
my goodness.
you
Yes.
know?
Oof.
Yeah, that's just, that's crazy. And I'd love your thoughts on this. One of the things I've shared in the past on the show that I picked up somewhere was, you should be able to explain your strategy to the person that just experienced your marketing. Like, so if they just
Mm.
watched a video and it was meant to touch their emotions, if you can honestly explain your strategy, like, I wanted to humanize this issue, so I showed you someone that looked like you so they could tell their story, not so that I could manipulate you into doing blah, blah, blah. That's basically like, if you can, with a clear conscience, explain your strategic choices, then you're probably okay. Is that
Right.
what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair. I think also I've seen other people say things like, would you feel good about somebody using your tactics on your grandmother, right? Or somebody
Yeah.
else you love. Do you feel good about this, or do you feel like
Yeah.
you got to hide it? Is definitely a good benchmark for yourself.
Man, the worst is when you know these tactics and they still work on you. Like,
Mm,
they got me.
yeah.
And anyway, this is probably a great time to remind everyone about Sabrina's upcoming webinar. It's Clarity Over Confusion. Again, mark your calendars for Wednesday, May the 15th, 2024 at noon Central Time. You can look for details at resourceumc.org or in the MyCom email newsletter.
Let's celebrate what draws us to the United Methodist Church. The BUMC campaign is a grassroots effort built upon powerful stories of congregations and people of God living their faith, celebrating what draws us to the United Methodist Church and what we aspire to be. Together, we honor the core values that connect the people of the United Methodist Church and cause us to embrace our Wesleyan heritage and envision a promising future. The BUMC Leader Toolkit includes messaging and resources to build awareness and help local churches and annual conferences participate in the campaign. Help us bring the campaign to life. Visit resourceumc.org/BUMC.
Well, now it's one thing to be able to tell good individual stories. It's another thing to create a campaign. And if we actually want to influence people and shape how they understand an issue or a cause and ultimately call them to take a positive action, there is strategy to that. And it oftentimes requires more than just one story. So without giving away, obviously, your whole bag of tricks, can you talk us through the basic anatomy of a communications campaign?
So I think we always want to start with the end in mind, right? When you're doing anything, you want to have that sort of backwards design approach. Where am I trying to go with this? What's my goal? What's my purpose? You always want to start with that core purpose in mind, because everything has to feed back into that purpose, right? If you're trying to get people to take a certain action, first of all, you want to make sure, is this action actually meaningful? Is it going to be of service to them as well as to whatever it is that you're trying to do? What is the win-win that you're trying to invite people into? You start there, and then you want to think about, okay, so if I'm starting, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. You want to also understand, who am I trying to accomplish this with, right? Who do I need to move? What are their core concerns? What are the things that they're really going to need to understand and hear in order uh, to see this as a worthwhile use of their time, their energy, their money, whatever it is that's going to be involved. And
Yeah.
so once you've got a solid understanding of your purpose and who you're trying to reach, then you want to start to think about, okay, so what are the ways that I would have to reach them, right? The reason you want to start with your purpose and your audience in mind, of course, is because you're not going to know what to create for them, what to offer them, where to put it. Right? We have so many different channels
Yeah.
and platforms available to us now. You need to know those first two things in order to be able to make choices downstream about what kinds of stories am I going to tell? Who am I going to reach out to tell these stories? Where do I want to put them, on different platforms, et cetera.
Yeah.
You need to know things about your audience in order to understand where to reach them. You need to know things about your audience in order to understand what are they going to need to hear in order to feel logically and emotionally aligned with whatever it is that we're trying to do. And so really those are the key elements in a nutshell, is starting with that purpose, knowing your audience, and then figuring out what does that audience need to hear, see, experience, and where in order for this to be
Mm.
successful.
Yeah, you're not going to reach Gen Z on Facebook these days. So
Right.
that's just one of them. Well, and I would imagine too, part of how you flesh that out, what they need to see and hear. Do you also think of it as like a progression? Like what is the way in? How do we capture the attention of someone that doesn't have this on our radar? And how do we get them interested? And then how do we do you, again, like be as general as you'd like, but do you have sort of like a map in mind?
Absolutely. I think every time we're thinking about, again, that purpose, you want to start with that, the purpose in mind, because that's your end point, right? And then you're mapping the journey backwards from there. And so as you're thinking about taking people on this journey, you need to think about, okay, where are they already? Which is why you want to, next know your
Mm,
audience. You want
yeah,
to get as much information about them as you can. Now, obviously, every single time you're launching a campaign, you don't have necessarily the time or the
right,
resources to do focus
right.
group testing and things like that. But particularly when we're talking about our faith communities, the people we know, right? We do have a wealth of information already about what they're facing, what they need, what they're interested in, all of these different things. And you want to really draw on that, based on this information that I have, what do I need? How can I come alongside them to walk them toward this endpoint,
Mm,
this desired goal that's a win-win for everyone involved. And so, it's not necessarily like a always a linear progression, but it's
yeah.
really about thinking about, okay, so if this is where we're trying to go, what are going to be the particular roadblocks my audience might need to get around? And that's going to shape the stories I tell them along the way and where I place them. The other thing we always know is that people need repetition, right? They need more than one opportunity to encounter whatever it is that you're trying to help them understand, invite them to be a part of, et cetera. And so you want to think about, okay, I have multiple different times to communicate with this person that I need to be able to. And so, one, you want to make sure every communication that you're giving them is kind of geared toward, again, if there's these roadblocks to them getting to the that purpose endpoint, then I want every one of my communications, every story I'm telling along that journey to help them navigate around, over, through that roadblock, right?
Yeah.
And so each communication should have one core idea that it's
Mm,
communicating, that's helping them get around, through, or over that roadblock. You want to stick to one thing per thing that is all feeding into this bigger narrative that serves that purpose that you're trying to, bring people toward, so that they're getting repetition throughout because everything is aligned around a common narrative, but it's not repetitive. Right?
yeah.
We want the repetition of what they need to know, the key information they need to know, but we don't want it to become monotonous or repetitive in their minds, right? So each time you're doing that, you're kind of, again, one roadblock might be a certain misperception they may need to reconsider. Another roadblock may be a perception of like not having resources, time, energy, whatever, in order to be able to participate in what you're inviting them to. Another roadblock might be a perception of, like there's could be any of a number of things, right? This is part of why you want to know your audience as
Yeah.
much as possible. And once you figure those things out, you create the communication that they need to hear to help them around that particular roadblock. And that's also where you're thinking about who's the right messenger for each message, right? Because again, there's going to be certain people who are going to help them get around certain roadblocks more easily than others. And so as you've mapped that out, then each time you're giving them multiple opportunities to opt in, you're giving them multiple opportunities to become familiar with whatever it is that you're dealing with, but all of it is feeding into this bigger narrative that's helping accomplish that win-win purpose that you started with in mind.
Well, that's great advice for preaching, which is just a reminder that it's all the basics of communication, right?
Yep.
It's just basics communication. It's just what form does it take and who's it aimed at? And I would guess in your work in DC, like some of the campaigns you're on, the audience you're trying to reach are people who don't have an issue on their radar. And then some of the people you're trying to reach in other campaigns might be highly informed people who are entrenched in a particular point of view, and you're trying to get them to maybe think about it in a new way. I had a friend that worked for a previous White House, and they were part of the team presenting a Supreme Court nominee to senators. And there's probably no like more informed or at least entrenched group of people to communicate with than senators considering a Supreme Court nominee. And we can laugh about that in the political arena, but we have stuff like that in church too.
Sure.
And so you got to know who you're talking to.
Absolutely.
We've touched on it here or there, but when we specifically think about digital storytelling, this is itself a unique challenge. We sort of joked about it earlier. You're not going to reach Gen Z on Facebook. We are now in a world where everyone can publish, right? Like anyone can become a Kindle author, and you can do it in 5 minutes now. You can have generative AI write a book. You can have generative AI give it a cover. You can upload it to Amazon Kindle for free, put it for 99 cents, and you're now a published author, right? Anyone can broadcast. We can accomplish incredible levels of polish and production. And so in this oversaturated world of internet, I heard a new term today, AI slime. We are now like in an internet covered with AI slime, and it's just growing. How do we make a dent? Like, how do we stand out? How do we say we're real people and we're worthy of your attention?
Oof, great question. And yes, I think part of it, right, and this is again where I'm like, y'all have a huge advantage over most of my other clients because you have God on your side.
Yes, ma'am.
We want to start from purpose, right? What are you called to do, right? That is a thing that artificial intelligence will never have on you, right? You have a specific reason why you're here. You have a specific calling, purpose, story, testimony that some other specific group of people needs, right? And the first thing, and this is why I always say start with purpose, right? The first thing you want to be really clear on is, why am I doing this? Who is this for? Why am I doing this, right? Because we know, one, there's going to be some of the stuff that just kind of stumbles into people, people just stumble on as they're scrolling or whatever else. But we also, our first audience really should be the people who are looking for us, right? You were put on this earth to solve a problem for somebody, right? There are things in your particular, you're gifted with the things that you were needed in order to answer some cry of your generation, right? And so if you start there, that's how you're going to get the people who are looking for you, right? Start with like your Google searchers in mind, right? Start with the people who are actually looking for what you need. And so because we are in this oversaturated environment, on the one hand, it's very overwhelming. On the other hand, that is actually more motivation for people to specifically try to seek the things they need as opposed to just letting it, overwhelm them. I think the other thing that we want to always keep in mind is, again, if you're trying to solve a problem for that is affecting a specific community, affecting a specific group of people, then you don't try to get everybody. I think one of the ways that communicators, particularly folks who don't do communications professionally for a living, right, they're not specific enough.
Yeah.
Who am I trying to reach? And so if your goal is, I want to reach as many people as possible, I want to no, like you want to really be specific, like think about, pray on, right? Who is that person who really needs this, right? And think about ways to speak specifically to their situation, right? Most people are going to scroll past you. They have to, right? There's too much for them, but you're not here specifically for everybody. You're here for a specific group of people and a particular audience member at a particular time facing a particular problem, right? And so if you really get specific as you can, and think about, okay, what is this person, what are they dealing with right now? What's overwhelming them? What is stressing them out? Whatever the thing is that you're trying to help them with, right? the more you can really think about who is the person I'm trying to reach, what's their experience on the other side of this screen, then you can start to create content that is going to speak specifically to them. One of the things that I think it is a scheme of the enemy to get us to do bad things in digital storytelling or in this digital communications marketplace is because we can now put a number on everything. You can count every view, you can count every click, you can count every share, etc. There's so many metrics, and a lot of them are pure vanity, right?
Oh, yeah.
You don't need everybody in the world to see your content. You don't need, don't let pride, don't let shame drive your strategy. If you get these specific people, like especially in my business, right? The people I have helped, they have audiences, going up into the millions. My personal audience isn't that, but my audience converts, right?
Yeah.
They do the things that I need them to do because I'm very specific. Here's who I'm doing things with and for. And so by the time they're in my inbox asking for something, I know I'm going to close whatever it is the call to action is, because and so you actually want to filter out. Don't be dismayed if your video doesn't have a whole lot of views. If all the people who viewed it took your call to action, that was a success, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so we want to always be really careful about, when you're trying to make a dent, you only have to make a dent with the people who you need to reach. It doesn't have to go viral. I like, especially coming out of a pandemic, my God, why are we still so stuck on this concept of virality, right? We want to make sure that, and that's why you start with purpose, so that when you're being successful, because you've reached the people you're trying to reach, and you're inviting them successfully into the things that you want to do together. That's your win. Don't worry about how many views are on it. Don't feel any kind of a way, when you get stuck at 43 views or whatever else. Like, everybody's been there, and it's so tempting, right? We know who's hissing in our ear when we're sad about those numbers, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, again, if they're aligned, if they're taking your calls to action, if you're doing meaningful things in your community and your world, that's the win. Not having a bunch of numbers that might look impressive, but don't actually make any meaningful change in the real world.
It's still a challenge to reach a specific group of people, but it is it feels like a more manageable challenge to say, just show up for one type of person or show up for one community. Like, you can do that. And if you do that consistently enough, they will get the message that you are real and you do care. So
absolutely. And the other thing too, to get to building organic growth that way, is that if you're very specific and you solve that problem for the people that you are trying to reach, right? They start to do the work for you, right?
Yeah.
Word of mouth is still a thing in 2024. Hallelujah, right? If you actually make a real difference in people's lives, if the thing you're doing matters, right? And that's why we always want to be aligned, solid moral principles, logic, evidence. That's going to make the meaningful real world impact for people. Then they are motivated to share. Then they're motivated to tell other people. When you create, especially digital content that people want to be seen sharing, that makes people feel good, being aligned with, being seen, associated with. When you're doing that, then you're going to have people, wanting to spread your content further. And so that's the other thing, is that the more you can actually dial into that, when you really reach your people, then your people give you that network effect that you're looking for.
That's so true. Now, before we wrap up, I want to selfishly ask one question that I've been wrestling with, and I imagine some, if not many, of our listeners have been dealing with this too. And maybe this can again be a teaser for your webinar coming up in May, but the last 4 years of ministry have been incredibly hard. And I'm sure it's been hard in your work too. It's been hard on everybody. But we have the pandemic, increasing political polarization, sometimes exposing things in our churches that we didn't realize were there. And obviously we've got very specific conflicts within our own denomination. And so I have sometimes felt like there are only two approaches, and they're two ends of the spectrum. One is hit people with as many facts and fact checks and detailed reasoning as possible, or don't say anything at all and keep it under the banner of it's all about Jesus, and then hoping not to rile up anybody. But I'm getting the sense that you see, and I mean, if you work in DC, you have your hands in messy and emotional discussions and challenges that we face. And you are here proclaiming the benefits of storytelling. So can you maybe encourage me and people like me to see storytelling as a tool when it comes to these volatile issues and emotional challenges?
Sure. So I think, one, recognizing that everybody has a story that leads them to the place where they are, right? And so being being, able to hear and listen to everybody's experiences is really important. We don't have to choose between, speaking the truth and representing the truth, right? Jesus is
Yeah.
the truth.
Yeah.
When we really anchor ourselves, and here's what we want people to understand, when we really are rooted in empathy, because that's the other thing, right? Especially when we're talking about things that are really divisive, especially when we're talking about things where there's, confusion, misinformation, all these different things going on. We want to be clear as we listen to people, where are they coming from, right? Why are they holding on to this bit of information they found? What's the underlying concern? That's when we really listen for those things. And then we can, find ways to speak the truth in love that addresses those underlying concerns. I think that's really the key. Sometimes we get so caught up in the like, well, that's not true. And actually,
Yeah.
and that completely misses the boat of like, this person is not holding on to this bit of, misinformation or confusion, or they're not in their polarized space because they want to be there. There's an
Yeah.
underlying concern that has led them there. And so once we can really deeply empathize with people and understand how they got where they are, then we are in a position to speak the truth in love rather than, beating people over the head with a fact hammer, or opting out of the conversation to kind of, agree to disagree, keep the peace, which is not loving either. I always want to like reinforce
Right.
that for folks, right? Declining to tell people the truth is not loving,
Mm.
right? They need the truth in order to be able to live safely and harmoniously in a dangerous world. And so when we don't tell people the truth, especially we know we're dealing with souls, right? Everyone is dealing with souls, they just don't know it. But,
It's
there's a
true.
particular, responsibility we have knowing that that's what's on the line, that we can't afford to bend to every cultural or political trend. We can't afford to. And I think the other thing that really, especially as we think about this false choice between like, do we stick to the facts or do we keep it about Jesus?
Mm.
We have to do both of those things precisely because we know what's at stake. And when we're in those messy conversations, we, again, huge advantage over so many other people in the world right now, because we have a guide to truth, right? We have that shared common word. We have these stories and this information that we can lean on. Ultimately, when it comes to being able to get through this, we have a common denominator that we can come back
Mm.
to. And we have to lean on that, not what and this is the other reason why it's so important to, and this is straight from the political communication strategist's mouth, get out, not put politics first, right? Not
Yeah.
lean on our cultural or political preferences, but really lean first and foremost on the truth of the word of God, because that, God is love. We're not going to outlove him by like changing what or how we say it in order to like sound more like the world or more like culture. The more we really just recognize we have this at our disposal and we need to, always come back to it and help ourselves and help each other, unplug from the distortions in the world, unplug from the teams, the factions that the world wants to sort us into. Our churches need to be places where we can set that down, not because we're trying to dodge hard conversations, but precisely because this has to be the place where we can show, hey, the left and right sides of the body are part of the same body, right?
Yes.
We need to be able to walk in tandem. We need to actually be able to move in unity. And that's not uniformity. That's not conformity. But there, when we actually remember who's really at the core of this, what we're really here for, keeping it about Jesus means speaking the truth, right? And so we want to make sure that we're just really anchored in what is true, so that we don't let political preferences, cultural preferences, just even more petty things like how we, whether or not we like this particular person who's, coming to us with a concern. We want to let all that stuff drop and just really be able to stay rooted in what we know to be true.
Well, thank you so much. And we normally ask everyone to give a last word of encouragement. I feel like that was so encouraging. If you have any last things you want to say to our audience, you can, but I certainly know some folks are going to want to reach out, follow your work online, or even get in touch. What's the best way for them to do that? And if there's anything last thing you'd like to share with our listeners, this is your chance.
Sure. So I think, again, remembering that we have just a wealth of information and tools already available to us just in our common faith. Like, you have such a big advantage there. Lean on it, lean on it, lean on it, lean on God. But I think in terms of connecting with me, my website is sabrinajoystevens.com. There's a place to connect with me there and learn a little bit more about what I do and why. And yeah, I just really look forward to getting to work with y'all in May, and hope that this is all useful to the people who most need to hear it.
Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing your time and wisdom. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And now, listeners, we want to hear from you. How have you seen storytelling used in impactful, but also ethical and healthy ways? What do you see as your next step in developing these skills, and how can we help? Email us at mycom@umcom.org. We just might share your thoughts or stories on a future episode. And you can, of course, use that email, mycom@umcom.org, to send us any feedback or topic suggestions you have for the show. We always love hearing from you. And as always, the easiest way to support this show and help other church communicators like yourself find it is by sharing this episode with your friends and colleagues, by leaving a review on whatever service you're listening to right now. And don't forget, sign up for Sabrina's workshop, Clarity Over Confusion. It's happening on Wednesday, May 15th, 2024 at noon Central Time. You can get all the details over at resourceumc.org. Thanks again for listening to the MyCom Church Marketing Podcast.
This episode of the MyCom Podcast was brought to you by United Methodist News. We've been dedicated to providing fair, faithful, and trusted reporting on the news and events shaping the United Methodist Church for almost 85 years. United Methodists and individuals outside the denomination alike rely on UM News to tell the authentic story of the church. Get the latest news and subscribe to receive it daily at umnews.org.